BrianTerrell is our other award winner today and will be our speaker as well. I think there's some negative stuff we need to get out of the way, first of all. At one time, Brian was the mayor of Moines, Iowa. He was also the parish council president of the Catholic Church there. And with regard to this combining of church and state, I think we probably have to get that cleared up before he goes for higher office. Not that I'm one to start scandal mongering or anything. Brian was from Wisconsin back 1975. He began as a Catholic worker in New York City. As many of you know, Dorothy Day was still alive and present there on the scene, and so that is a very, very important connection that he has with not only history in this country, but a continuing movement. Brian went after that to Davenport, Iowa, to the Catholic worker community there. He met another woman there, Betsy Keenan, who became his wife. Betsy and Brian, back in the 1980s, moved to southern Iowa, to Moines, I think at the behest of John Zeitler, I believe, and are still there. A Catholic community, a Catholic worker farm, and Brian has continued now for 40 years living a life of hospitality and peace and justice efforts that have run the gamut of issues of nuclear disarmament, drone warfare, more recent times, the death penalty, corporate agribusiness, and so on. And he is probably an expert at federal detention facilities as well at this point in his life. Brian was the director of Catholic Peace Ministry from 1999 to 2008. Currently, he's a co-coordinator of Voices for Creative Nonviolence and an events coordinator for the Nevada Desert Experience. He has traveled extensively through Europe, many speaking engagements, many of the countries of Central America and the Mideast. Very recently has been in Afghanistan and Korea. Perhaps we'll share some of that. The title of his presentation today is Peacemaking in a Time of Perpetual War. It's my pleasure and privilege to be able to, first of all, present to Brian our award, and then invite him to share with us. Brian, please come forward.
Just last Tuesday, I got back from Nevada. Part of one of my jobs, I coordinated this year's Sacred Peace Walk. It's a 65-mile desert pilgrimage over Holy Week from Las Vegas to the nuclear test site. Got there a little bit ahead of time and scouted the route. And when we got to the peace camp, just across the highway from the nuclear test site, we saw the whole area was fenced off. And there was no place to get any access to this place where, since the early 80s, people have been staging demonstrations to shut down the testing, which finally happened in 1992. And it just happened to be that a sheriff's deputy came by and explained to us that the state had named it a historical site and that no one but archaeologists would ever be allowed to be inside the peace camp ever again. So our success in making history, precluded our demonstration in the presence. Now, I made a bunch of phone calls, and the Department of Transportation in Nevada has a staff of archaeologists. And I talked to them, and they clarified that the fencing was up because there was some road construction going on, and they did recognize the historic significance of what we had done there, and they didn't want heavy machinery, trucks and backhoes and things going in and maybe wrecking. We had stones in the peace symbol, and we had graffiti on the overpass and stuff, all of which can't be touched anymore. So, yeah, this event is 20 years old, and I was at the first one when Helen Tichy received this award. So, very happy memory. So 20 years, it's long enough to be historic too. But our discipline as Catholic Peace Ministry, Nevada Desert Experience, and any of us old activists is we have to celebrate our history, but keep it alive too. Otherwise, our lives and our good work will be something that artifacts only anthropologists will be interested in. So I would very much enjoy this evening just recounting our common history, but the program is full for this evening, and I've been asked to keep it short, and there are some urgent matters that we need to discuss. 2002, Vice President Dick Cheney revealed that the United States was considering military actions against 40 to 50 nations. This war, he said, may never end and could become, quote, become a permanent part of the way we live. In the years since, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq have not concluded but only broadened. Through use of special operations forces, weaponized drones, aggressive diplomacy, the spectrum of U.S. wars has grown, expanded beyond what anyone could have imagined 13 years ago. Police departments are increasingly militarized, armed and dressed, not to act as public servants, but as an occupying army. Decades of progress for nuclear disarmament are being reversed as billions are being spent now developing the next generation of nuclear bombs. And the U.S. military has become the world's largest contributor to global warming. Pope Francis recently noted, "We are a world at war everywhere," and suggested that we are already in the midst of World War III, but spread out in small pockets everywhere. The current war, the Pope says, is one fought piecemeal, with crimes, massacres, and destructions. Now, there's scholars who disagree with the Pope and the former Vice President, and some will celebrate our current time as the most peaceful era in human history. Over recent decades, we're told, nations are finding other ways than war to solve conflicts. There are fewer wars being waged today than at any other time. This scenario goes, and if present trends continue, war itself will disappear into the mists of time. And strictly speaking, there's a grain of truth to this. And war, as it's been understood through history, may actually be becoming a thing of the past. But this grain of truth is no cause for comfort. It is a fact, in the years since World War II, there have been only 4 formal declarations of war in the world. Last one, I think, 2005, Chad against Sudan. And technically, except for these exceptions limited to very specific times and places, the world has been at peace since 1945. The reality on the ground is different. It's that despite the absence of official states of war, millions have been made homeless, millions have lost their lives, and hundreds of undeclared conflicts around the world. War was outlawed by the Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1929 and again the Charter of the United Nations in 1945. But instead of ensuring peace, however, the unintended consequence of the end of war as we know it has been the obliteration of the traditional parameters of war. While those parameters were often disregarded and violated, the laws of war did set limits and boundaries. It defined combatants and civilians. In today's conflicts, armies do not fight each other so much as they attack the same civilian populations. And today, it is statistically safer in any of these conflicts to be a soldier or a combatant than it is to be a civilian. Just a few miles from here, many of you are aware, at the Des Moines International Airport, members of the Iowa Air National Guard will soon be waging war by remotely controlled drones. These weapons are the cornerstone of Obama's foreign policy. And if you can accept a 28-to-1 ratio of unintended victims toward targeted victims, then maybe this is an effective means of illegal assassinations. But they're not very good in combat. In fact, General Mike Hostage, who recently is the commander of the U.S. Air Force Combat Command, had said, "Predators and reapers are useless in a contested environment." But killing outside of a contested environment is not an act of war, it's murder. If there's a benefit from today's blood-soaked lawlessness, it's clarity. To find an example of the hypothetical and always elusive just or legal war, one can only look to the past. By any accepted measure, there is no claim of legitimacy for the current aggressions of the United States or any of its future contingencies. All our crimes, all are to be condemned without reservation. So, perpetual everlasting war has become the norm. If these are the times we live in, what must we do? I've had opportunity these last months to live and work with communities that are effectively and joyfully raising to the challenge of being human in such times as ours. Last September, I was on Jeju Island in Korea, and I witnessed the Catholic Church joining with the Buddhists, Anabaptists, shamans, to help farmers and fisherfolk resisting the construction of a huge new naval base. It'll be one of the largest bases in the world when it's finished. It's devastating the environment, and it recklessly tilts the world toward war with China. But to be a Catholic on Jeju now is simply and unequivocally to be at odds with a military-industrial complex. Every liturgy is an act of resistance. Since I've been home, it feels like something's missing. When I attend a Mass, it's not interrupted at least 6 times by the police. Then for 2 weeks in January and February, I was guest of the Afghan peace volunteers in Kabul, Afghanistan, representing Voices for Creative Nonviolence. The war is officially over, but Kabul today is a very dangerous place to visit, more perilous to live. But in this most desperate place and time, there are some few young and courageous men and women who know that their survival depends on finding new institutions and patterns of living, creating new ways of living. And the same is true of us here tonight. Father Dave said all the speakers have come here to offer hope. And I have to say, I hope I can do that too. But my experience as I'm in my travels is I am more convinced that people do not act because they have hope. They have hope because they act. And it's in acting that we find hope. So all of us are obligated to speak out as clearly as we can. About the war in Vietnam, Martin Luther King Jr. insisted that everyone, quote, of humane convictions must decide on the protest that best suits his or her convictions, but we must all protest. There's no alibi. What form this takes is the responsibility of each of us. But we must all protest. Without presuming to tell any of you how you must protest, I suggest that if you abhor the devastation of the earth and the many murders being done in your name, there should not be anyone in your circle of family and friends, co-workers, club members, people you meet in the pubs and coffee shops who don't know how you feel about all of this. And I'd encourage you to find ways to act in such a way that you can dramatize and articulate that objection in ways that no one you know will have the slightest doubt, not the slightest doubt possible, where you stand on these issues. I was in Pennsylvania in 1981, and I attended the trial of the Plowshares 8, 8 friends who went into a nuclear weapons plant and destroyed the nose cones for the Mark 12A missiles. And what I'd like to leave you with this evening might best be said by recounting what Daniel Berrigan said in his testimony at that trial that I think is maybe even more appropriate today than it was back in 1981. It's terrible for me to live in a time where I have nothing to say to human beings except stop killing. There are other beautiful things I would love to be saying to people, There are other projects I could be very helpful at, and I can't do them, I cannot. Because everything is endangered, everything is up for grabs. Ours is kind of a primitive situation, even though we would call ourselves sophisticated. Our plight is very primitive from a Christian point of view. We're back where we started. Thou shalt not kill. We are not allowed to kill. Thank you.